I used to mark time by seasons. Spring inventory, fall launch, holiday rush. But that Monday, I started measuring days by the sound of his key in our front door and the way our daughter's backpack slid off her shoulders like a bird molting mid-flight, frightened but pretending not to be. If you're here because life blindsided you too, you're not alone. And before we begin, please subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Stories like this are a way back to yourself, even when the plot cuts deep. I didn't know then that everything would detonate within 2 weeks, or that the fuse was already lit in my own living room, ticking beneath a neat stack of school flyers and a lipstick-smudged thermos he swore was grapefruit tea, which it wasn't, as the stain would later confess, quietly but completely. That was the first hairline crack, and I couldn't stop staring through it. My name is Claire, 36, founder of a small clothing startup called June House. Linen, cotton, honest stitches that hold when life stretches you thin. Evan worked from home. Contracts, consulting, something webbish that sounded like fog whenever he explained it. And he handled school pickups for our daughter, Maddie, 7, whose drawings tape the world together better than any seam I've ever sewn. On good days, our life looked like a postcard. Folded laundry in the basket, sourdough cooling near the window, emails like polite waves instead of storms. On days like this, the postcard curled at the edges, and an image of Evan laughing, a little too easily with other moms at dismissal, kept slipping out of the frame. The first message came disguised as a grocery note, tucked under a receipt. All men's for trail makes, and that thing we talked about, noon. There was a heart next to noon, small and careless, like a stone someone tosses at a window to see if it shatters. And I felt the sound before I heard it. A quiet break inside my ribs. Maybe it was nothing, I told myself, because people who love you deserve the benefit of the doubt until they spend it like free samples at a warehouse club and the cart is still empty. Maddie asked if I'd come to the PTA spring pop-up on Friday. Daddy says Mrs. Emery's bringing cupcakes. And I said, of course, even though Mrs. Emery had texted Evan 3 times that afternoon, and I knew because his watch flashed names like little fireworks he forgot to hide. I wasn't snooping. I was drowning, and sometimes drowning looks like paying attention. I tried to stitch my way through it at the studio, counting pleats, pinning hems, yet the tape measure felt like a lie, because how do you measure the distance between the person you thought you married and the stranger laughing on a bench near the playground, sunlight on his jaw, a mom's hand briefly on his sleeve? He'd been doing more drop-ins at school lately, said the principal, liked parent presence, which sounded noble until the pattern emerged. Midday errands that took exactly 47 minutes, a revolving cast of moms who needed a hand with car seats, and the thermos that kept wearing other people's mouths. By 4 o'clock, I'd hemmed 6 skirts and unthreaded my faith, stitch by gentle stitch, pretending it didn't hurt while it bled through everything. At dinner, Evan told a story about a funny mishap in the pickup line. Laughter in the right places, like a script he'd rehearsed with the mirror, while I plated roasted carrots and wondered when the kitchen had started smelling like someone else's perfume. He asked if June House could donate a rack to the PTA pop-up. They could use a local brand support, he said, like a salesman who knew the right button to press. And I nodded, because I wanted to see the room where he'd been living his other life. It'll be fun, he said, kissing the top of my head, a drive-by of tenderness that felt like a receipt printed 2 days late. I smiled anyway, because that is what you do when your house becomes a stage and you don't yet know your lines. That night, I lay awake and listened to the house breathe. Air vents sighing, water pipes clicking like arthritic knuckles, the dog settling with a relieved huff. And I mapped the next 2 weeks without quite believing I was doing it. Day 1, notice. Day 3, confirm. Day 5, plan. Day 12, expose. Day 18, end. It felt clinical and cruel and necessary. Like cutting a dress on the bias. It drapes better, but only after you respect how fabric falls when it's under pressure. Sleep finally found me the way truth does. Late, uninvited, and with a light I couldn't turn off. In the morning, I told Evan I'd bring the full rack to Friday's pop-up myself. and do a mini fit clinic for the moms. Quick measurements, free alterations, I said, like a woman who treats community as currency. And he lit up in a way that told me he hadn't realized the ledger was about to be audited. "That would be amazing," he said, voice quickening. "I can help you set up." And in that moment, I knew I didn't have to catch him. I only had to invite him to the scene he'd built and turn on the house lights. My startup kit includes more than needles and chalk. It includes a sharp eye for patterns and the patience to let them reveal themselves where everyone can see. At noon, I messaged Lena, neighbor, lawyer, and the person who once held my hand in the Target aisle when I cried into a pile of bath towels after a bad manufacturer run. Hypothetical, I wrote, fingers barely shaking. Spouse WHF dad, serial flirt at child's school, likely adultery with multiple moms, minimal confrontation until proof, civil path only, 2-week window. I need strategic containment, clean evidence, and a court-ready plan. She called immediately. "You're going to be calm," she said. "You're going to be colder than the ice in their PTA punch bowl, and you're going to let their own routine betray them." We listed what was admissible, text sent to my shared plan, calendar invites, the pop-up's public sign-in sheet, a few careful photos in publicly accessible spaces. And I felt a steadiness return, like finding the grain of the wood beneath the paint and knowing which direction to sand. The plan didn't feel like revenge then. It felt like a mirror I would finally stop holding at an angle. That evening, I pressed labels onto June House paper bags, 30 of them, simple and pale, with a ribbon that never knots too tight. And I told myself that every bag was a boundary. If he crossed into my space at school, into my name and work, he would discover that the backdrop he'd used for cover had become a stage with clean light and good acoustics. Maddie fell asleep with a paper crown from art class tilted over one eye, a soft reminder that love is the only fabric that never pills when you treat it like something worth hand-washing. I stood in the doorway and decided, 2 weeks, no more. The calendar on our fridge still had a smiley face on Friday. I left it there, a small kindness to the child who deserved a world that didn't wobble. When I turned the kitchen light off, the thermos on the counter caught a moonlit edge, and the stain at its lip looked like a smirk I'd soon wipe clean. Private schools in Manhattan don't run on tuition alone. They run on whispers, fundraisers, and the silent ledger of who brings what dish to the spring gala. And that morning, as I walked past the school's wrought iron gates, gold crest glinting like a dare, I realized the same stage Evan had used to parade his helpful dad act was about to tell me its own story. The walls of privilege have a way of gossiping if you lean close enough to hear. I leaned in. The carpool lane was a symphony of engines too polished to growl, nannies with clipboards, and mothers whose diamonds caught more light than the sun itself. Maddie squeezed my hand before darting inside, her ribbon bouncing. I stayed longer than usual, letting my gaze travel across the manicured courtyard. Evan was already there, bent over to help Mrs. Emery's daughter with a shoelace, his hand lingering just a second too long on the mother's wrist. A laugh followed, hers, not the child's. It was bright and rehearsed, like a bell rung at the wrong time. The first sign wasn't the shoelace. It was the way 2 other women watched from the steps, their heads leaning together like conspirators. They weren't jealous. They were entertained, as if his little entanglements had become part of the Daily Show. And suddenly, I wasn't the only one clocking the pattern. I was the only one pretending it didn't exist. That knowledge burned hotter than anger. It clarified, like fabric under steam, smoothing out all my doubts. Later at my studio, while pressing seams on a rack of linen skirts, I replayed the morning. His hand, her laugh, the sideways smirks of the gallery of mothers. I remembered the receipt with the heart beside noon. I remembered the thermos stain that wasn't mine. Patterns, when repeated, are no longer accidents. They're designs.
And Evan, without realizing it, had drafted his own downfall right there at the school gate.
By evening, Maddie came home with a crumpled flyer. Spring Gala, an evening for excellence, a benefit for the arts wing, hosted in the school's chandeliered hall. Parents only, formal attire, silent auction. Evan was already giddy. "It's the event of the season," he said, pretending he cared about violin endowments. "Everyone will be there. I can handle the drop-off if you're too busy with June house prep." His words were casual, but his eyes flickered, quick, guilty, as if he already knew who he'd be escorting around that evening. That night, when he slipped into bed smelling faintly of someone else's perfume, an expensive, musky kind that wasn't sold in our zip code, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just noted it like a bookkeeper. Day 3, pattern confirmed. The following morning, Lena, my neighbor and lawyer, stopped by with coffee. She leaned against my counter, scrolling through her phone. "Private school scandals?" she said, showing me a news clip of a different family's implosion last year. Affairs, divorce, all exposed during a fundraising gala. "These places are brutal, Claire. Reputation is everything. The second one mother sniffs blood, the others circle." I smiled, a thin seam of an idea forming. If Evan wanted to build his playground inside this school, maybe it was time to let the playground do what it does best: broadcast. That afternoon, while folding June house tags, I tucked a small recorder into my tote. Nothing illegal, just my phone, screen dark, its mic wide open. I lingered at pickup again. This time, near the courtyard bench where Evan held court. Voices carried in those marble-lined spaces, laughter echoed like confessions. And just as I expected, his voice rose above the others, teasing, promising, arranging lunches that weren't on any calendar. Mrs. Emery laughed again. Another mother chimed in, "Don't let your wife catch you, Evan." They all laughed harder, as if the joke were already common knowledge. My tote caught every word. I didn't need to confront him. Not yet. The private school would do that for me, in its own language of hushed scandals and ruined reputations. All I had to do was prepare the stage. That night, while Evan showered, I replayed the recording with my headphones. Each laugh landed like a hammer, but instead of breaking me, it built something: a case, a strategy, a mirror I could hold up when the lights were brightest. The gala was only a week away. I had 7 days to sew the perfect dress, not just for myself, but for justice. The kind that glitters when the chandelier falls silent and everyone turns to see who's really been unmasked. I closed my laptop, circled the gala date on the calendar, and whispered into the quiet kitchen. Patterns don't lie. People do. The city outside buzzed with neon and sirens, but inside my home, a colder, sharper rhythm had begun. The countdown had started. Some people think betrayal announces itself in thunderclaps. In my world, it came softly, like seams unraveling, one thread at a time. By day 5, I realized if I wanted to end this, I couldn't just rely on suspicion. I needed evidence, tangible as fabric swatches on my studio table, proof that no amount of Evan's charm or private school polish could iron flat.
The school gala loomed in 6 days, the kind of event where reputations could be made or broken in a single evening. Evan kept talking about the silent auction as if he had suddenly developed an interest in endowing violins. I let him chatter, but inside I was already cutting and stitching my own plan. What he didn't know was that I wasn't aiming for a confrontation. I was tailoring a revelation. And revelations, like gowns, look best when they fit perfectly. On day 5, I walked Maddie into school instead of just dropping her at the curb. Parents clustered in the atrium, a small society of curated wealth. The walls carried every echo, every glance, every misplaced laugh. And sure enough, I caught Evan at the far end, leaning against the admissions board with 2 mothers whose heels clicked like punctuation. Their laughter ricocheted through the marble. He didn't see me, but I saw enough.
Later that morning, Lena met me at my studio. Between bolts of linen and racks of half-finished blouses, I laid out my thoughts like pattern pieces. The thermos, the texts, the courtyard laughter, the way the other mothers already treated it as an open joke. Lena nodded, her lawyer's precision sharpening every edge. "You don't need to expose it today," she said, "but gather what you can. School sign-ins, PTA rosters, even email chains. These places document everything. Their obsession with appearances leaves a paper trail a mile long." Her words clicked into place. If reputation was their currency, the school's own paperwork would be my ledger. That afternoon, I volunteered to help assemble gift bags for the gala. It was a task nobody glamorous wanted, which made it perfect. In the school's basement storage room, while mothers stuffed tote bags with scented candles, I casually picked up a clipboard from the PTA table. It listed volunteers for every event that semester: lunch helpers, reading buddies, carpool coordinators. Evan's name appeared more times than mine, next to different mothers on different days, always paired, always in the middle of the day when he was supposedly working. My chest tightened, but my resolve stiffened. Patterns don't lie. On day 6, I brought Maddie early, my phone tucked in my coat pocket recording as we walked through the courtyard. Evan was there again, crouched to tie another child's shoe. Different mother this time. Same laugh, same lingering touch. As I passed, I heard one of the women whisper, "Careful or Claire will find out." The other replied, "She's too busy with her little business." Their voices carried, unaware they had just spoken into the silence I'd been waiting for. My tote caught it all. That evening, while Evan scrolled on his phone pretending to work, I spread the PTA roster and the audio transcripts across my studio table. The evidence began to form a pattern more damning than any lipstick stain. Sign-ins, overlapping names, whispered voices. Each piece was a seam. Together, they became a garment I'd soon strip from him in public.
When I played the recording back for Lena, her eyes narrowed. "This isn't just gossip, Claire. This is corroboration. He's entangled with multiple women, and they're already mocking you behind your back. At the gala, you won't need to raise your voice. Just present the pattern. The room will do the rest." I folded the PTA roster neatly, slid the audio file into a password-protected folder, and circled the gala date again on my calendar. 6 days left. 6 days to finish the hem of the truth. That night, while Evan kissed me absent-mindedly on the cheek, smelling faintly of cologne I hadn't bought, I smiled, because every kiss, every lie, every careless laugh was another stitch in the garment he was unknowingly tailoring for himself, and when it was ready, I'd let him wear it in front of everyone who mattered most to him. The school's crest gleamed on Maddie's homework folder as I tucked her in. "Mommy, are you coming to the gala?" she asked sleepily. "Of course," I whispered, and I meant it, not as a wife on his arm, but as a woman ready to pull the final thread. By day 8, the air in our apartment felt different, not heavier, but taut, like fabric pulled across a frame just before the first cut. Evan still moved through the rooms with his usual self-assurance, emails at the breakfast bar, calls taken in the den, but I could hear the strain beneath his voice. When people live double lives, the seams always stretch, and mine were ready to split them wide open. The gala was only 4 nights away. Maddie hummed as she colored at the table, blissfully unaware, while Evan whispered on his phone in the bedroom, the door half closed by accident. I didn't press my ear against it. I didn't need to. Words like, "see you before rehearsal," carried far enough. He thought the school's polished walls would protect him. What he didn't realize was that those same walls were about to amplify him. On day 8, I brought Maddie to school early and lingered by the coffee urn in the lobby, where the mothers gathered like swans on a lake, smooth on the surface, frantic underneath. I smiled, offered napkins, asked questions about the gala's centerpieces, and in those moments of casual chatter, I learned more than I expected. "He's charming, I'll give him that," one whispered, eyes flicking toward Evan across the hall. Another replied,
charming until someone catches him. Their laughter was light, but edged. They already suspected. They just hadn't decided how to use it. That night, I met Lena at her office, evidence folder tucked under my arm. We sat across a desk littered with contracts and coffee cups, the city's lights humming through the glass behind her. She flipped through the PTA rosters, the sign-in sheets, the transcripts from my recordings. "It's enough," she said quietly. "Enough to establish a pattern. Enough to present to the court when the time comes. But at the gala," she looked up at me, "you need more than proof. You need spectacle. These people thrive on reputation. If you turn it against him, they'll do the rest."
On day 9, I visited the school again, under the guise of delivering June House scarves for the silent auction. While the coordinator fussed over where to display them, I slipped into the auditorium where gala preparations had begun. Tables lined with white linen, chandeliers polished to a blinding gleam, donation sheets already clipped to boards. I could almost see it. Evan laughing, basking, surrounded by the very women he betrayed me with, until the lights shifted and the truth walked in. The stage was perfect. That evening, Evan came home, whistling, tossing his jacket on a chair. "You'll love the gala," he said, casually, as if inviting me were a courtesy. "Big donors, great exposure for your brand. You should mingle." His arrogance was steady, but his eyes darted when I asked, "Who's your date for rehearsal?" He froze for a fraction of a second too long. Then he laughed it off, kissed Maddie's forehead, and changed the subject. That pause was louder than any confession. Before bed, I texted Lena a single line. "He's rehearsing with her." She replied instantly. "Then let them rehearse. Opening night is ours." I looked at the calendar again. 4 days left. Enough time to stitch the last details, to make sure every seam held, to let him believe his performance was safe. He wanted an audience. I'd give him one, but the script would be mine. As I folded laundry in the quiet of day 9, I paused at one of Evan's shirts. Crisp and starched, smelling faintly of cologne I didn't buy. I smoothed the fabric, my fingers steady. Soon, this shirt would be the costume of a man stripped bare under chandeliers. Maddie patted in, yawning, asking if I'd be at the gala. "Of course," I said softly. "Front row." She smiled, trusting, and padded back to bed. The apartment settled into silence, but my heart beat like a metronome. 4 nights. That was all the time left before the curtain rose. And when it did, I wouldn't need to shout. I'd simply pull the final thread and let his carefully stitched facade collapse under the weight of its own lies. By day 11, the gala had become the only conversation in our house. Evan called it our big night, though I knew exactly whose performance he was rehearsing for. Every detail he offered, caterer this, auction that, wasn't for me, but for the mothers whose laughter now echoed in every hallway of that school. And yet the louder he talked, the quieter I became. Silence can be sharper than any blade when you know what you're saving it for. The invitations had gone out weeks before. Embossed cards with the school crest stamped in gold. Black tie optional was a suggestion no parent would dare ignore. I hung my own dress by the closet door that night. Black silk, clean lines, nothing ostentatious. It wasn't meant to dazzle. It was meant to disappear into the room until the moment I stepped forward with the truth. That was the difference between fashion and strategy. Fashion pleases the eye, strategy blinds it.
On the morning of day 11, I lingered at drop-off. The mothers huddled at the steps like sparrows, bright coats flashing against the winter gray sky. I caught fragments of their talk about the wine list, the seating chart, the very generous donation from the Emery family. And tucked between the chatter came the words I had been waiting for. Evan's name, spoken with a smile that wasn't entirely kind. "Oh, he's a regular hero," one of them said, "always willing to help with whatever's needed." The pause before "whatever" said more than the word itself. I tucked it away like a seamstress pocketing loose thread. That evening, Lena came by with Chinese takeout and her laptop. Between bites of lo mein, she showed me how to organize my evidence for maximum impact. "You won't need to argue," she said. "Just display. The documents will do the speaking." We spread the PTA rosters across my kitchen table, aligning them with dates on my phone's recordings. Side by side, they told a story even Evan couldn't laugh away. I felt the chill of clarity settle in. On day 12, the school buzzed with last-minute preparations. I volunteered again, folding programs in the auditorium while chandeliers overhead caught the afternoon light. From the stage, I looked out at the rows of seats. I imagined the parents, the donors, the board members, an audience eager for spectacle, though not the kind they expected. Evan wandered in mid-afternoon, pretending to check on the acoustics. He winked at one of the mothers, then noticed me watching. His face flickered just for a second, but I caught it. Guilt is like poorly sewn lining. It always slips into view when you least expect it. That evening, while he showered, his phone lit up on the counter. A text preview glowed. Rehearsal went perfectly. Can't wait for Friday. No name, just the implication. I didn't open it, I didn't need to, because what he thought was rehearsal was really just a warm-up for his downfall. Later, as Maddie slept, I sealed 3 envelopes with neat handwriting across the front. One for the headmistress, one for the PTA president, one for Lena. Each contained the same curated package: sign-in sheets, audio snippets transcribed, and a brief summary of dates. Nothing sensational, just facts arranged like pearls on a string. Facts polished enough to shine under the GALA lights. When I slid the envelopes into my tote, I realized how light they felt compared to the weight they carried. It wasn't anger anymore, it was inevitability. He had chosen his stage, and I had chosen the spotlight. All that remained was to switch it on. By the end of day 12, the house was quiet again. Evan scrolled his phone with that smirk of secret triumph, oblivious. Maddie fell asleep with glitter still stuck in her hair from art class. And I sat by the window, the city's neon humming beyond the glass, whispering my countdown into the dark. 3 days till the gala. 3 days till the curtain rose. And when it did, I wouldn't raise my voice. I would simply let the evidence speak, and let the room decide who was the husband, who was the father, and who was nothing more than a joke dressed in a tuxedo.
By day 13, the city itself seemed to know what was coming. Even the winter air carried an edge, brisk, expectant, like a curtain about to lift. Evan floated through the apartment with a confidence that would have been admirable if it hadn't been so misplaced. He was rehearsing lines for an audience that didn't yet know they were part of my play, and I watched, silent, threading the final stitches of his undoing. The gala invitations sat on the counter, thick cream cardstock edged in gold. Evan kept picking his up, as though the embossed crest made him important by association. "It'll be dazzling," he said, pouring himself a whiskey he hadn't offered me. "People will talk about us for weeks." He wasn't wrong. People would talk, just not in the way he imagined, and not about us. Only him. That afternoon, I met Lena at a cafe tucked between a florist and a gallery, places we could disappear into easily if anyone from the school board wandered by. Over steaming lattes, I slid the 3 envelopes across the table. She skimmed the contents, lips pressing thin. "It's airtight," she said at last. "By the time the lights dim at the gala, you won't even need to raise your hand. The crowd will do the talking." Her calm steadied me. Her certainty sharpened me. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I was a strategist. Day 14 carried me back into the private school's gilded halls, where mothers darted about with clipboards and rolls of velvet ribbon.
I helped hang banners across the atrium, deliberately blending into their world. From the corner of my eye, I caught two of them glance toward Evan, their whispers fluttering like silk. Their laughter was brittle. Even before the evidence came out, his reputation was fraying at the edges, and the more they smirked, the more I realized the school was already primed. All I had to do was hand them the thread. That evening, Evan strutted into our bedroom in his new tuxedo, tags still dangling from the sleeve. "How do I look?" he asked, twirling slightly, as though I were the adoring wife he believed me to be. "Like someone about to be unforgettable," I replied softly, folding a blouse into my suitcase. He chuckled, thinking I was flattering him. But what I was really packing wasn't clothes, it was certainty. Later that night, Maddie patted in with a question that pierced sharper than any recording. "Daddy said he's going to be the star at the gala, but you'll be there too, right?" I kissed her hair. "Yes, sweetheart. I'll be there when the stars come out." Her trust settled around me like armor. Before midnight, I texted Lena one last instruction. "When the lights dim for the auction, hand them out." She replied with a single word: "Done." I stood at the window after sending it, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, each building lit like a stage prop. Evan believed this city gave him cover, anonymity in its size. What he didn't know was that in rooms like these, private schools, private galas, your world is smaller than you think, and once the curtain rises, there's nowhere left to hide.
By the end of day 14, the house was quiet, except for Evan's soft snores, smug even in sleep. I sat awake, my dress laid out across the chair, my tote by the door, with the last envelope tucked inside. 2 days until the gala. 2 days until chandeliers lit the room, champagne bubbled in crystal, and my silence became the loudest sound of all. Friday evening arrived dressed to impress. Manhattan's skyline glittered, as if it, too, had bought a ticket to the gala. By the time our car turned onto the tree-lined street of the private school, I could already hear the hum of laughter spilling from the great hall, polished and eager. Evan straightened his tuxedo in the rearview mirror, humming to himself. He thought this was his stage. He didn't know it was mine. The gala was a spectacle of wealth. Chandeliers blazing above polished parquet floors, white-gloved servers balancing trays of champagne, and parents who looked more like diplomats than PTA volunteers. Evan strode beside me with practiced ease, nodding, shaking hands, leaning too close to women who leaned back just enough to make it look coy. His confidence filled the room like perfume, thick, cloying, impossible to ignore. I let him bask. Stars shine brightest right before they burn out. I moved through the room quietly, greeting a few mothers with June house scarves tied neatly around their necks, small tokens of my work, now doubling as a reminder of who I was outside of his shadow. From the far corner, I watched Evan tilt his head in exaggerated interest as Mrs. Emery recounted some trivial drama. He laughed louder than necessary, hand grazing her elbow. A few heads turned. The laughter around them faltered. People notice more than they admit. The silent auction tables lined the hall, glittering with donated luxuries, vacation homes, spa retreats, rare wines. Evan hovered near one display, signing his name with a flourish he hadn't earned. He thought generosity was borrowed grandeur. He didn't see the way the PTA president watched him, lips pressed thin, eyes calculating. Reputations in rooms like this don't crumble with scandal alone. They collapse when the audience decides it's more entertaining to watch someone fall. I felt my phone buzz, Lena's message. In position, when the auction begins, it starts. I tucked the phone away and took a glass of champagne from a passing tray. The bubbles hissed against the rim like a secret. Across the room, Evan's laugh grew louder, as if volume alone could keep his lives afloat. But already the women closest to him were exchanging glances. They weren't laughing with him anymore. They were waiting.
As the orchestra struck its first notes and guests began drifting toward their tables, Evan returned to me, grinning, cheeks flushed from too much whiskey and attention. He whispered in my ear, his breath tinged with arrogance. I smiled, lifting my glass in mock agreement. What he didn't know was that belonging is fragile, and tonight it would slip through his fingers like spilled champagne.
When the headmistress stepped up to the podium, welcoming everyone and praising the generosity of this extraordinary community, I caught Lena's eye across the room. She had the envelopes in her hand, discreetly passing them to the PTA president, the board treasurer, the donors at the front tables, heads bent, papers unfolded, murmurs spread like ripples in silk. Evan clapped loudly, oblivious as the tide turned beneath his feet. He leaned toward me, voice smug. By the end of tonight, people will remember my name. I set my glass down, steady as stone. Yes, I said softly, they will. The first act of the gala had begun, chandeliers blazing, strings swelling. But already the undercurrent shifted. Whispers spread, eyes flicked, forks paused mid-air. Evan still smiled, still soaked in his imagined spotlight, unaware that the very stage he loved had become the jury box. By the time dessert was served, his name would mean something entirely different. And when the curtain fell on this glittering night, no tuxedo in Manhattan could stitch his reputation back together. By the time entrees had been cleared and wine glasses refilled, the room's energy had shifted. What began as chatter and applause now carried an undercurrent, furtive glances, hushed exchanges, papers folded discreetly beneath napkins. The gala hadn't erupted yet. It simmered, like fabric pulled too tight across the seam, waiting for the stitch to snap. Evan sat beside me, posture easy, tuxedo gleaming, utterly oblivious. He thought his biggest triumph that night was securing a bid on a Bordeaux he couldn't afford. He didn't notice the sidelong stares, the sudden silences when he laughed too loud. But I noticed, because every silence was a verdict waiting to be spoken. At the next table, the PTA president's husband leaned across his wife's chair, voice pitched low. Her eyes didn't leave the documents Lena had slipped her. She tapped a finger on Evan's name, circled multiple times on the volunteer rosters. Her lips moved as she read a line from the transcripts. "Don't let your wife catch you." She looked up, straight at him, then away again quickly. Further down, the headmistress sat rigid, the same packet folded neatly on her lap. She scanned the crowd, gaze pausing on Evan with an expression I couldn't quite read, half disappointment, half calculation. In schools like these, reputations weren't just personal currency, they were institutional assets, and she had just learned hers was tangled with his. Evan raised his glass for a toast, grinning like the room was his to command. Only a smattering of hands lifted in return. He chuckled at the awkwardness, assuming the crowd was distracted by the orchestra tuning up. But the truth was already spreading through them like dye in water. Clear one moment, clouded the next. By the time dessert arrived, whispers had grown teeth. Mrs. Emery leaned into her friend, voice sharp enough to carry. So it wasn't just me. Her friend stiffened, eyes flicking toward me, then back to Evan. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel invisible. I felt like the only person in the room who wasn't pretending anymore.
Evan leaned closer, voice dripping with smugness. "See, they can't get enough of me." I turned my head, studied his face under the chandelier's unforgetting light. His smile was wide, but a bead of sweat clung to his temple. He felt it now, the subtle withdrawal, the thinning applause, the laughter that no longer landed. He just didn't understand why. And then came the moment I had waited for. The auctioneer, clearing his throat, thanking the volunteers whose extraordinary commitment to the school made the gala possible. He began reading names. Each one drew polite applause until Evans came up. A ripple of murmurs swept the room, not claps. The applause faltered, hands lowering mid-motion. Evan laughed nervously, lifting his glass again, but nobody followed.
His name now hung in the air, heavy, suspicious, naked. The chandeliers still sparkled, the orchestra still played, but the spotlight had shifted. Evan's stage had become a courtroom, his audience a jury with evidence in hand. He still smiled, still tried to charm, but charm has a shelf life. And tonight, under the weight of whispers and folded papers, it had already expired. The gala wasn't over. The best act was still to come. But by dessert, Evan's performance was already unraveling, thread by thread, and I had barely lifted a finger. By the time dessert plates clinked onto linen-draped tables, the gala's polite sheen had thinned. Laughter came sharper, whispers longer, glances heavier. Evan sat straighter, his smile fixed like starch on a collar. He didn't know it yet, but the performance he'd spent weeks rehearsing was already over. The curtain had risen on something else entirely, his unmasking. The orchestra struck a soft waltz as couples rose to dance, sequined gowns brushing against polished shoes. I remained seated, glass of champagne untouched. Across the room, I saw Lena exchange a look with the PTA president. She gave the smallest nod. It was enough. Envelopes shifted hands again, this time openly. Papers fanned across tablecloths, heads bent close. The stage lights of reputation had turned harsh, and Evan stood dead center. He crossed to the dance floor, hand outstretched toward Mrs. Emery, bold as ever. But she recoiled, a smile plastered on for appearance's sake, her eyes sharp as glass. "Not tonight," she said, lightly, voice carrying farther than she intended. A few nearby couples faltered in their steps, listening. Evan laughed too loud, too quick, and turned to another mother. She declined before he could finish asking. Back at the table, the headmistress folded her packet with deliberate precision. Her voice cut through the music. "We'll be reviewing these matters Monday." She didn't raise her tone, but the weight of her words carried farther than any microphone. Evan froze mid-step, his grin slipping. Around him, mothers whispered, husbands narrowed their eyes, the orchestra playing on like background to a verdict. He still smiled, still tried to charm, but charm has a shelf life. And tonight, under the weight of whispers and folded papers, it had already expired. He crossed to another table, slipped into the conversation, laughed too loud, said a gag it choked in his own throat. He would still pretend it wasn't happening, but it was now, point blank, impossible. Back at our table, the headmistress folded her packet with deliberate precision. She said, "The legal team will contact you tomorrow." She used a tone that no gathering of charm could squeeze. Evan froze mid-step, his grin slipping. Around him, mothers whispered, husbands narrowed their eyes. He returned to our table, face tight, glass trembling in his hand. "What's happening?" he hissed, eyes darting, searching for a lifeline. I tilted my head, studying him the way I might a poorly sewn seam, beautiful at a glance, unraveling under strain. Maybe I said quietly, they finally noticed the pattern. His hand tightened around the glass until it clicked against his ring.
The PTA president rose, her pearls gleaming under chandelier light. "On behalf of the board," she said, "I want to thank the parents whose contributions reflect integrity and dedication to our children's future." Her eyes swept the room, lingering on Evan. A silence followed, louder than applause. Integrity, dedication, words that landed like stones. Then, from the back table, Mrs. Emery's husband stood. His voice was calm but edged. "I think we should all be clear what kind of man we're applauding at these events." He held up one of Lena's packets. "Because this," he shifted the papers lightly, "tells a very different story." A murmur surged, chairs scraping, forks clattering. Evan's face drained, colorless under the chandelier's glow. He stammered, reaching for me as if I'd save him,
but I only folded my napkin neatly, laying it across my plate. You wanted them to remember your name. Now they will. His hand dropped, empty, as the crowd's whispers sharpened into gasps. The orchestra faltered, losing tempo, as the room fractured into questions, accusations, icy stares. Evan sat motionless, exposed. The very stage he adored, now a courtroom, where every chandelier bulb shone like a spotlight. He had wanted an audience. He had one. The gala's final act wasn't applause. It was silence, pointed, deliberate, suffocated. And in that silence, his reputation collapsed, not with a bang, but with the soft, merciless unraveling of a seam cut too close. By Monday morning, the gala had already rewritten our lives. The private school's gossip network worked faster than any press. By sunrise, Evan's name carried a different weight in those marble halls, not as the charming father with time to spare, but as the man who couldn't keep his vows or his lies stitched straight. He thought the weekend embarrassment would fade. He didn't yet realize it was only the beginning. On day 16, I woke to an email from the headmistress, brief, polite, brutal. Mr. Dalton's volunteer privileges are suspended pending board review. In a school where reputation was currency, suspension was bankruptcy. Evan stormed through the kitchen, ranting about conspiracies, betrayal, jealous husbands. I poured coffee, steady hands, silent lips. When someone digs their own grave, you don't grab the shovel, you let them work. Day 17 brought the first phone call from a mother who had once laughed at his jokes in the carpool lane. She left a message meant for him, but delivered to me. Clipped words, icy tone, warning that her husband had seen the documents. "Don't contact me again," she said before hanging up. Her voice cracked on the last word. The affairs were no longer whispered indulgences. They were liabilities. And liabilities in this world cost dearly. By day 18, Lena slid divorce papers across my studio table. Clean, sharp, folded into a manila envelope. "He won't fight hard," she said. "Not with these transcripts, not with these rosters, and not after the board takes its vote." I nodded, pressing the papers flat. I didn't feel rage anymore. I felt clarity, like fabric pressed under a hot iron, creased into permanence.
That evening, Evan tried to bargain, his arrogance frayed. "Think of Maddie," he said, eyes wild, tie crooked. "We can fix this if you just—" His voice broke, then hardened. "You won't get the business. I'll fight for everything." I smiled faintly, sliding another packet across the table. Inside, proof of his affairs, copies of his reckless texts, PTA schedules linking his name with women who now denied him. He flipped through them, face draining. "Where did you—" He stopped. He knew. His own stage had betrayed him. Day 19 was colder. The headmistress called again. Evan's suspension had become permanent. "It's not just about him," she said carefully. "It's about what the school stands for." In New York's private school world, that was the final exile. He wasn't just unwelcome, he was erased. On day 20, we stood in a courtroom smaller than our dining room, quieter than the gala, final in its authority. The judge glanced at the documents, raised an eyebrow at the transcripts, and signed the decree without hesitation. Custody settled, assets divided, June house untouched. Evan's face crumpled as if the papers themselves carried weight enough to crush him. They did. Walking out, he tried one last look of defiance. "You planned this," he muttered. I met his eyes, steady. "No," I said. "You did. I only sewed the pieces together." His silence was heavier than any gavel. That night, Maddie curled up in my lap, asking if I'd come to her art show next week. "Always," I whispered, kissing her forehead. For the first time in weeks, my answer carried no shadow, no doubt, just truth. The gala had been his undoing, but the aftermath was my lesson.
Betrayal doesn't need rage to be avenged. It only needs patience, silence, and the courage to let the truth walk into the light. And as Evan packed his things into boxes, escorted by his own shame, I stood at the window of our apartment, watching Manhattan hum below. The city hadn't changed, but I had.